Let's talk about all things in terms of foreign news and the G20 summit with Bob Seeley, Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight and a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in the Commons. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julie. Good morning to the viewers and listeners.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Can I ask you just first of all, before we get to what the G20 and Ukraine and all of this, just your reaction to Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, and her deal on migrants and trying to tackle the number of people able to get into boats and the people smugglers being paid a fortune, her deal with the French. We have reaction. I don't think I found a single reaction from any of my audience saying, yeah, brilliant, glad we finally got a deal all sorted. Everyone's saying, like, this is deal after deal after deal, tens of millions of pounds given to the French. They're not dealing with the issue, and none of this is going to work. Do you think it will?
Well, I'm going to be positive about it because this isn't going to be solved by one action, but it's going to be solved by a bunch of actions, be it tightening the law in this country, getting the Rwanda system up and running, having a better working relationship with the French. So I think it's a good thing. Well done, Suella, for doing it and delivering it. It means we have British policemen over there, policemen and women. It means that we've got the French authorities investing more time and effort into this, and this is a good thing. It should have happened already. Probably that it hasn't happened because the French have been difficult for the last couple of years. Fair enough. We don't have to go back over that. But we've got progress with the French, so this is good news. Is this going to solve the problem overnight? No. Is it an important step forward? For sure.
Well, we shall keep our fingers crossed because I think a lot of people do want that to be dealt with. In terms of the G20 summit, we see Rishi Sunak is arriving today in Bali. He left yesterday. That's obviously the 20 biggest economies in the world. The leader of one of those economies will not be in Bali, and that is Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader. He sent Sergei Lavrov, his foreign minister, instead. Reports, we've just been hearing the news that he'd arrived, had some heart problems, went to hospital. That's been denied by the Russian Foreign Ministry. We don't really know who to believe at this point. But there is we've seen Rishi Sunak in an interview with journalists overnight on that plane has said basically, criticising Vladimir Putin for not defending what he's done in Ukraine in person, taking the criticism in person. He's called Russia a rogue state. Do you think there's going to be anything decided at the G20 summit that will further pressurise Russia to end this invasion of Ukraine?
I think there are two useful things. Great question, Julia. I think there are two useful things that can come out of this. Pressure on Lavrov, if he makes it out of hospital, pressure on Lavrov about nuclear weapons, making sure that the Russians know that any use of tactical nuclear weapons, any use of chemical weapons like in Syria is a complete no-no and will mean that Russia simply becomes a larger version of North Korea. So that's the first point. And the second point, again, as Rishi made in his priorities for the G20, we need to be talking about stopping the Russians weaponizing food production and food distribution. So if they're stopping the grain getting out from Ukraine, that means that people are going to go hungry in the developing world and throughout the world. Whether you live in Ethiopia or Enfield, you're going to be paying more for your wheat. So we need to stop the Russians trying to weaponize food supply in the same way that actually we need to stop them weaponizing refugee flows, which is what they're going to start doing in Ukraine by destroying electricity, by destroying water supplies as well, because that's very much part of their strategy.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, there is some talk about Joe Biden meeting with Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, in the very first time as president. We've met, obviously, previously when he was vice president. But whether or not there can be some pressure put by Xi Jinping on Vladimir Putin, particularly one of his few major allies, in return for some... Who knows what could be offered to Xi Jinping, particularly in relation to Taiwan, by the West? Do you think that's likely that something like that could happen?
Some quid pro quo? No, I don't think that's going to happen because the Americans have pledged to defend Taiwan militarily and they're going to stick to that. I think this is important because regardless of whether we respect or regardless of what we think of other people's values, political value systems, we need to be working with everyone. So we need to be engaging with Lavrov, if only to say how much we disagree, but what on earth are they doing? Isn't it time that actually they need to be stopping this war and starting to think about peace? And in the same way that when we're talking to China, we need to be developing those relationships. But at the same time, look, we are becoming economically over-dependent on China, and China is increasingly bellicose, increasingly threatening. So we need to have very robust conversations where we defend our own values and principles. At home, we make sure we've got the policies to defend those values and principles and our economy. But at the same time, we develop these good relationships, or better relationships, and relationships based on understanding and respect, so that people know where our red lines are and what we will defend and where we seek to work with others.
But we're in this interesting situation where we've got this energy crisis because of Russia Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and of course long-term net zero policies and the like. But that energy crisis, that's Russia. If we hadn't had to put sanctions on Russia and they hadn't invaded Ukraine, we wouldn't be in that crisis right now. However, we are in also, the main reason we're in a lot of the other economic pain is because of lockdowns, because of COVID. We followed Chinese policy after a virus which China allowed to escape from probably a lab, who are we kidding, and to escape and infect the world. And we seem to treat China as if there is a benign economic ally. This is a hostile, murderous, tyrannical state. When are we going to start treating Xi Jinping as we treat Vladimir Putin? He's done more harm to the world, realistically, than Vladimir Putin has.
Okay, I slightly dispute that last point, but you're absolutely right to say that China is becoming a rival. They are increasingly, Xi's leadership and the Chinese Communist Party's leadership is increasingly bellicose to its neighbours, increasingly threatening. At the same time, we are increasing, sadly, our economic dependency on supply routes and supply lines from China, which is dangerous because it gives power to the Chinese Communist Party or more influence over us. But at the same time, if there is a war in China, one of the byproducts will be a collapse of the global economy as we seek to resecure supply lines elsewhere. What they're doing in Xinjiang, I think, is appalling as abuse of human rights. We've got the Magnitsky Awards on Thursday. Remember, Magnitsky was the lawyer murdered by the Russian state. Bill Browder campaigning for many years, brilliant work by him. We've got the Magnitsky Awards, where actually we're celebrating people who defend human rights in places like China, in places like Hong Kong, in places like Russia, and in places like Ukraine when it's being invaded by Russia. So you're right, we need to be far more robust in what we're doing. And above all, we need a cross-government China strategy, which after 3 years, sadly, as much as I support